work with him. We can't really talk. My father is a very difficult person.
The only movie that could compete for an Academy Award for Best Picture with Leonardo's bathrobe in one battle after another is this one right here, Sentimental Value. A Norwegian film about a narcissistic filmmaker who abandons his family, returns 16 years later, and somehow makes it everyone else's problem. Joachim Trier walked into Cannes 2025 and left with a 19-minute standing ovation and the Grand Prix. Then he walked into the Oscars and took home Best International Feature, the first Norwegian film ever to do that. So yeah, we're talking about it. A man who made films about everything, except the family he was destroying in the process. And then he comes back with a script about his dead mother, and he wants to shoot it in the house where she died. And he wants his daughter, the one he abandoned, to star in it. And she says no. So he flies in an American actress instead. And somehow, he thinks this is fine. Joachim Trier made Sentimental Value like a surgeon who is also the patient. This is a film about creative narcissism so precise, so uncomfortably specific, that you will spend half of it laughing and the other half checking your phone to see if your dad has texted you back. Spoiler, he hasn't. Here's the angle nobody is leading with. This is not a film about grief. The trailer wants you to think it's about grief. The Cannes press tour wants you to think it's about grief. It is not about grief. It is about a man who mistook his family for source material, and the women who had to keep living inside his rough cuts long after he stopped filming them. Stellan Skarsgård plays Gustav, a once celebrated filmmaker. Now a man running on legacy fumes and the unearned confidence of someone who has never once been told no by anyone except the people who loved him most. He walks back into his daughter's lives with a script in one hand and absolutely zero self-awareness in the other. And the film never lets him off the hook. Not once. That's the whole movie. And we need to talk about it. Sentimental Value opens quietly, a family home in Norway, the kind of house that looks like it has opinions. Gustav's mother, a resistance fighter who survived Nazi torture and then didn't survive herself, died in that house. And Gustav, being Gustav, looked at the place where his mother took her own life and thought, cinematic. That's your first diagnosis right there. We'll come back to it. His daughters are Nora and Agnes. Nora, played by Renate Reinsve, who you might remember being absolutely devastating in The Worst Person in the World, is a celebrated stage actress. Sharp, controlled, professionally brilliant, personally falling apart after their mother's death. Agnes is quieter, steadier, the one who stayed, the one who always stays. You already know which one had to become the parent and which one got to stay the child. You've met this family before. You just didn't know their names. Gustav offers Nora the lead, the role of her own grandmother, in the house where everything went wrong. And Nora, in what is genuinely the most psychologically loaded scene of the entire film, says no. Not because she can't do it, because she can. And she knows exactly what saying yes would mean. It would mean handing her father the one thing he has always wanted from her pain, repackaged, reframed, and sold as his art. So she says no. And Gustav, with the breathtaking emotional intelligence of a man who has spent 60 years making everything about himself, immediately casts Elle Fanning, an American, a stranger, someone with no skin in the game, someone who can cry on cue without it costing her anything real. And Nora has to watch it happen, from the audience, in her grandmother's house. That's not drama. That's a psychological crime scene. Let's talk about the psychology. Because Trier didn't write characters, he wrote case studies, and I have thoughts. First, Gustav. Diagnosis: narcissistic personality disorder with a God complex so advanced it has its own cinematographer. This is a man who genuinely believes that turning his mother's suicide into a feature film is an act of love, that dragging his estranged daughters back into the worst geography of their childhood is healing, that casting a Hollywood actress in the role he offered his own daughter, after she said no, after she drew the one boundary she has ever drawn with him, is just a creative decision. Nothing personal. It's just art, sweetheart. Here's the thing about Gustav that the film understands better than Gustav understands himself. He's not cruel, he's incapable. There's a difference. Cruel people know they're hurting you and choose it anyway. Gustav genuinely cannot see the damage because the camera is always pointed outward. He has spent his entire life framing other people's pain as his subject matter, and somewhere along the way, he forgot that the people in the frame are real. The bathrobe comparison is almost too easy. At least Bob in one battle knew he had failed. Gustav still thinks he's winning. And then there's Nora. Diagnosis: chronic high-functioning abandonment wound dressed up as artistic perfectionism. She is extraordinary at her job precisely because her job requires her to feel everything in a controlled environment with an exit. The stage is the only place in her life where the pain has edges, where it starts and stops on someone else's schedule, where she gets to leave. Her father tried to take that from her too, and called it an opportunity. That's the whole character. That's 16 years. And then there's Agnes, the one nobody talks about in the press junkets. The one who doesn't have the flashy breakdown or the dramatic monologue or the Hollywood actress playing a version of her feelings on screen. Agnes just stayed, made breakfast, answered phone calls, handled the funeral arrangements, kept the house from becoming a monument to everyone else's unprocessed grief. Diagnosis: parentified child, textbook, chronic, untreated, the kind of person who is so good at holding everyone else together that nobody ever thinks to ask if she's held together herself. Nora got to leave and become a star. Agnes got to stay and become functional. The world rewards Nora, it simply relies on Agnes. And the film, quietly, without making a speech about it, understands that this is its own kind of violence. The dynamic between the two sisters is where Sentimental Value does its most devastating work. Because Agnes isn't resentful, that would be easier. She loves Nora. She worries about Nora. She is actively, tenderly looking after Nora in the middle of her own grief that nobody has thought to name yet. And that selflessness isn't a character virtue. It's a survival mechanism so deeply installed she doesn't even notice it running. Gustav did that, not by being a monster, by simply not being there. Absence is its own kind of shaping force. You don't need to do damage actively when you can just leave and let the architecture collapse around the people who couldn't. And then there's Elle Fanning, playing Rachel, an American actress dropped into a Norwegian family wound like a foreign object in a healing cut. Here's the thing about Rachel that the film is too sophisticated to say out loud. She's not the villain, she's the mirror. Rachel has no history with this family, no scar tissue, no 16 years of waiting for a phone call that never came. She can play the grandmother with complete emotional freedom precisely because she has no emotional debt attached to the role. She's not performing grief, she's performing the idea of grief. And it's beautiful, and it's hollow, and Nora has to sit in the audience and watch a stranger do in 2 takes what she has been living her entire life. That's not a casting choice, that's a psychological execution. And here's where I'm going to lose half of you. Good. Stay anyway. Sentimental Value is being celebrated as a film about a bad father and the daughters who survived him. Every review, every Cannes think piece, every Oscar night speech has framed it exactly that way. Gustav is the wound. The daughters are the wound bearers. Trier is the compassionate surgeon exposing the damage. I think that's the wrong read. Completely. Gustav is not the villain of this film. Nora is. Not because she's a bad person, she's not, but because she is the only character in this film who is offered a genuine exit from the cycle and chooses, repeatedly, consciously, with full psychological awareness, to stay inside it. She says no to the role. Smart, healthy, boundary set. And then she comes to every single rehearsal anyway. She watches Rachel inhabit her grandmother. She attends the family dinners. She keeps showing up to the crime scene with a front row ticket and then acts surprised when it hurts. Gustav is a narcissist running on autopilot. He doesn't know what he's doing. That's not an excuse. It's a diagnosis. But Nora knows exactly what's happening and walks toward it anyway, every single time. And the film, brilliantly, quietly, without ever saying it directly, is actually about the seduction of inherited pain. The way some people don't just carry their wounds, they curate them, polish them, build an entire identity around the very thing that's destroying them, because the wound is the last place they felt their father's attention. And losing the wound means losing the connection, even if the connection was always just damage dressed up as love. Nora doesn't need to heal her relationship with Gustav, she needs to stop auditioning for it. Let's go deeper, because we haven't even talked about the house yet. The house is a character, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Gustav wants to shoot inside the actual family home, the place where his mother died, where his daughters grew up, where the absence of him was so loud it had its own furniture. And Trier shoots it like a memory that hasn't decided yet whether it's a nightmare. Every room holds something. Every corridor has a psychology. This isn't production design. This is inherited trauma rendered in architecture. Here's what the house actually represents in clinical terms. It's what psychologists call a trauma anchor. A physical location so saturated in unprocessed emotion that simply being inside it dysregulates everyone who grew up there. Nora can't walk into a room without becoming 12 years old again. Agnes can't sit at the kitchen table without automatically starting to take care of someone. And Gustav walks through it with a viewfinder and calls it research. He is literally monetizing his family's trauma anchor and framing it as preservation. But here's the layer Trier adds that makes this genuinely uncomfortable. The grandmother, the woman whose story Gustav wants to tell, was a resistance fighter. She survived things that should have broken her. She was tortured by actual Nazis and walked out the other side. And then she died in that house anyway. Not because of the Nazis, because of everything after. Because survival doesn't automatically come with the tools to live. Because sometimes the most extraordinary people in history are completely ordinary in their own kitchens. And Gustav watched that as a child. Watched his mother survive the unsurvivable and then not survive the everyday. And his response, his lifelong, compulsive, obsessive response, was to keep filming. Because if it's on camera, it can't disappear. If it's on camera, it means something. If it's on camera, then maybe the pain had a point. That's not filmmaking. That's a child who never stopped being terrified of losing his mother, trying to keep her alive the only way he knows how. And somehow that makes Gustav more tragic than Nora, and more dangerous than either of them realize. Nobody fixes this family. This family fixes itself. Partially. Imperfectly. In the way that real families do. Not with a cathartic confrontation scene and a swelling Johnny Greenwood score, but with a small, quiet, almost accidental moment that you'll nearly miss if you're checking your phone. And that is the whole film in one sentence. Here's what the ending is actually doing. The film doesn't give you resolution. It gives you something harder and more honest. It gives you continuation. Nora doesn't forgive Gustav. She doesn't have a breakdown in the rain and finally say the thing she's been holding for 16 years. She just keeps going. Agnes keeps making breakfast. Gustav finishes his film. Rachel flies back to America with a performance that will probably win her an award and cost her nothing. And the house is still standing. That's the gut punch. The house is still standing. Because trauma doesn't end when the story does. It doesn't wrap. It doesn't resolve into a thesis statement. It just becomes part of the architecture, part of the way you hold your shoulders at family dinners, part of the reason you flinch at certain words, part of the specific silence that lives in the kitchen on Sunday mornings when nobody knows what to say to each other but nobody leaves either. Trier understands something that most filmmakers get completely wrong about generational trauma. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic score and a close-up of someone crying beautifully. It's just there, in the house, in the breakfast routine, in the way Agnes automatically starts cleaning up before anyone else has finished eating, in the way Nora stands at the back of the theater watching Rachel play her grandmother and doesn't walk out. She could walk out. That's the thing. She could walk out anytime. She never walks out. And the final image of the film, Nora standing at the window of that house, looking out at nothing in particular, not crying, not performing, just standing, is the most psychologically accurate portrait of what it means to survive a narcissistic parent that I have seen in a decade of watching films about exactly that. She's not broken, she's not healed, she's just there, still in the house, still at the window, still waiting for something from a man who has already given her everything he is capable of giving, which was never quite enough, and both of them know it. Final diagnosis for the entire film: ambiguous loss disorder, a term coined by psychologist Pauline Boss for grief that has no resolution. No closure, no clear moment where the loss is confirmed and the mourning can begin. Gustav is alive, he's present. He's making his film, having his dinners, occupying the physical space of a father. But the father Nora and Agnes actually needed, he was never in the building. You can't grieve someone who keeps showing up. And you can't stop grieving someone who never really arrived. That's sentimental value. Messy, precise, devastating, and so Norwegian, it physically hurts. Joachim Trier didn't make a film about a family. He made a film about the specific texture of loving someone who taught you that love comes with an exit strategy. Watch it. Sit with it. Call your father if you want to. Or don't. He probably won't pick up anyway. And if this hits somewhere real, subscribe. Because I try to collide the fictional world with 2026 reality almost every day.